Having a spontaneous Kundalini awakening can be crazy. It can be exhilarating, but also a little bit scary. And one of the specific areas that it could be the scariest is in this little nook that I'm going to penetrate today. And this was requested by one of our viewers. And it's that of identity loss after awakening and how we can begin piecing that identity back together post-experience. You see, a big blast of Shakti, energy or power, does have the consequence of stripping you of who you thought you were, or your ego, your identity. Strips it away completely, temporarily. It literally shatters the illusion of who you thought yourself to be. So then there's no wonder why the need or the desire to rebuild or find a new identity comes out of this explosive experience. But this isn't just limited to Kundalini. Whenever we have a rejection in the external world, or whenever we have something go wrong in our life and we think we're the problem, our identity has a profound way of trying to change itself massively so that it doesn't get rejected again. But please understand, if this is happening to you, this isn't Kundalini, this is just something completely different. But the identity game is still the same. So there are a few important subjects that I want to talk about in this video to help you unpack this for yourself so that you can decide the most appropriate way forward for you in your life. So I intend to download about a decade's worth of yogic experience into you in 10 minutes or less by unpacking the three following ideas. Firstly, the illusion of mental security. Secondly, how we can develop a healthy ego first and why that is imperative. And then thirdly and finally, coming back to reality after your experience and what that's going to look like for you. So without further ado, let's dive straight in with the first subject matter, and that's the illusion of that mental security. A big blast of Shakti will definitely change your life, but it will also leave you craving the certainty, or the seeming certainty, of the mind again. So here's how it normally goes. You have a mystical experience, and it completely shattered the fundamental nature of your identity. This leaves you in a massive void in you. And the reason this happens is because you were so identified with the mind, all of your attention was up there in your head. And as that gets blasted away, your attention is finally focused in that which is unfamiliar to you, which is the feeling presence, the emptiness of the inner body feeling. And that leads us to freaking out. But don't worry, this is just your true nature you're feeling and that you've been avoiding. And that emptiness or that void you're feeling is actually fullness and wholeness. But more on that later. The freak out you'll be experiencing is your mind trying to grab hold of certainty. Certainty that you believe existed in the construct of yourself, in the mind, the me. But sorry to break it to you, certainty never really existed. You just believed that it did. It was just an illusion because the mind made it seem like it knew what was going on and it had your life all planned out. But this was all a lie that we believed and kept telling ourselves so that we felt safe. But the trade-off was that we lived a very unsatisfying, unfulfilled, dead inside life. Because your sense of self was limited to this mental concept of I or me. It's so limited. And part of rebuilding our identity and our worldview after an experience like this is in the first part about warming your internal experience up. You stop avoiding the void and actually get into it, which requires a massive switchover from thinking, which is what you used to do, to feeling, to that which is natural for us. But this will feel very unnatural to your mind because you've been avoiding feeling all of your life. And this is why what typically precedes an awakening experience is a dark night of the soul. Because now you're feeling, you can't avoid the unavoidable, which is all of those emotions that we suppressed throughout our life. Now, some of us do have a larger storehouse of that coming for us than others. And I was the king of avoidance, so I did have to suffer about 2 years of heartbreaking sadhana as I moved through my dark night of the soul. And if you find yourself going through this experience, you can access some free teachings and some free sadhana down below. You can join our free 7-day spiritual growth accelerator course. I've made it for you, so you're more than welcome to. But more on that avoidance point, because most internet spirituality nowadays is just glorified avoidance. So it's further training you in that way to avoid the feeling of inner body presence. And honestly, this is why a lot of people don't like me, my teaching style, because I get them to face the truth Because at the end of the day, I'm not here to enable your avoidance. I'm here as an unconditional stand for your freedom. So as you try to avoid the void inside of yourself, you might notice that the mind is trying to piece back together and claw back in what it can of the old identity. And you can go that way for sure, but I don't recommend it. Because honestly, that's like a pair of old clothes that you just don't fit in anymore. You can try and put them back on. They won't quite fit the same, and it won't feel fulfilling in the same way that it used to. And that's because a whole new life is opening up as a potential for you. All that life is asking you to do is hear its call. But to do that, you've got to develop a healthy ego first. See, you can't transcend an unhealthy ego. And this is why the yogic tradition is set up in the way that it is. It's grounded, it's down to earth, because it recognizes that there are fundamental aspects of human nature that we must develop first before we start talking about transcending anything. So let's leave all this nonsense about transcending the ego and all of this pretentious virtue signaling of like, I've lost my ego, I don't even have any thoughts anymore. Because the first port of call after an awakening experience is to develop a healthy one. First, like a positive ego, not to get rid of it. And if you're honest with yourself, it's still there running the show anyway. You see, really any spiritual process that's worth its salt is about, in the first instance, making you a well-rounded, grounded individual for the world. And I know that after a big awakening experience, the ego just wants to chase the high and have more experiences. But it really doesn't work like that. The ego has wrapped itself around the bliss of the experience, and oftentimes the ego believes it needs to go up, up, and up. But this just isn't true. The ego actually has to come back down. We have to integrate it into the body so that we can be useful for life. To explain this, let me give you a real-world example. A student recently reached out to me on our app, and he's about to do our level 2 advanced pranayama training, so fairly good yogi. And he asked, hi, I know it's a random question, but do you know anything about attracting wealth or money on this path where we become financially free? And what about our purpose? And so to that I replied, you may become financially free if that's something you put effort towards creating for yourself. For you though, you'll need to get your energies to focus and stop them being so distracted. Then, as we cultivate a single focus of attention and of mind, we can look at how we might be able to apply that to something that might make you some money in the external world. Now, the reason I'm using this example is because essentially everything is learned on the mat first. And through our deepening into concentration practices and by increasing your energies through pranayama, you become an available vehicle through which you can serve life appropriately. And you see, this is where all the law of attractioners get it all wrong, because you do have to develop aspects and skills before you're going to manifest this dream life that you crave. Now, those skills work in the outer world, but more importantly, they work on the internal world too. As you progress and deepen into your practice, because your concentration and your single-pointed focus allow you to begin experiencing higher states of consciousness and deeper levels of awareness, and also make money in the external world. But at that point, you won't really care. You'll know that you need money and you'll be in a state of abundance, but you won't really care. Gone are the days, really, where we become a renunciate and go and live in an ashram. The path forward for most of us now is through action. That's what we call karma yoga, the yoga of action. So that means we transcend, or we integrate our ego. We purify our systems through the action of serving others, be that through a business or just random acts of kindness. That begins to purify our system and then begins revealing to ourselves our primal urge. Our primal urge is essentially what our energies would have naturally done and created in the world had the world not done us all up. And this we could then call your core identity, who you were always destined to be. So it's not necessarily that you have to piece back your old identity or piece back an identity after an awakening. You just have to get yourself in alignment with the breaking down of the false identity, and for that you need sadhana. But this false identity is essentially just conditioned masks to keep you protected and safe, and most of them aren't even yours, they're borrowed from your parents. And this allows us to develop some humility, because after a big awakening experience, what we really need is to come back down to reality. Without humility, you won't get anywhere on this path. Life's not here to serve your ego, and progression on the path is not more and more accumulation of spiritual experiences. The real path is a lot quieter. And some of you will listen to this and think I have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about. This guy isn't spiritual enough for me. This is your spiritual ego talking. This type of ego can be the most pernicious because after an awakening experience, the ego structure, which hasn't really changed very much, then grabs hold and fixates on the spiritual experience, or the bliss, and now believes that your ego is God talking to you directly at times. It's the same ego, the same structure, just has spiritual clothing on now, so we believe it as God-given fact and gospel truth. So it's very hard to remove this aspect of ourselves or even catch it at all. But it's probably one of the most important parts of identity work post-Kundalini awakening. Now, if you've got this far in the video, you're obviously interested in Kundalini awakening, and that might tell me that you may well have had one. Some of the issues that people face, though, is an awakening experience that's happened in a nervous system that really wasn't ready for it. And by that, what I mean, wasn't trained for it. So we're going to look at the dangers of a premature Kundalini awakening in this video here, and if you've had one, what you can do to help alleviate some of those breaks in the system that you might be noticing if this experience has happened to you. So by all means, watch that one there, and I'll see you in it.